Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. On this episode, we continue our Star Wars movie coverage, part 2, with a double feature that crosses generations for the first time since we've been starting this in story order. We're talking Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and then Solo, a Star Wars story. It's a lot to talk about, and it's all right here on Movie Marathon Mood. Stick around.
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
Is it possible to learn this power?
Not from a Jedi. Learn to know the dark side of the Force, and you will achieve a power greater than any Jedi.
You're under arrest, Chancellor.
Are you threatening me, Master Jedi?
By the dark side, young Skywalker has become.
I feel so helpless.
Chosen one!
Hi, I'm Jesse Ghostrap, joined again by my pal Drew Cordell. Drew, my friend, part 2 of our Star Wars double features.
Yeah.
In our first episode, in this series that crosses generations.
Yeah, and won't be the last.
No, won't be. Right in a row. You have a couple. This one is 2 different eras, but 13 years apart in terms of when the movies themselves came out. And I think there's actually a couple of specific things that are really interesting to me about how these movies relate to each other. And I don't want to skip too far ahead of myself and talk about Solo before we get through Revenge of the Sith. But I do think it's interesting, first of all, that Solo lives obviously in the aftermath of everything that happens Revenge of the Sith. Like, here's on the ground level what happened in the world.
Right.
I find that dynamic really interesting to watch them in an order. Not to mention that at one point they were talking about having Han in Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah.
And that would have changed the story entirely.
Right.
If it was a young Han Solo that was also pals with Chewbacca, that'd be really interesting. Very different. And I don't know how that would have played in the story either. It seems like way too much stuff to load into Revenge of the Sith. But
yeah,
nonetheless, did not happen, so we don't have to worry about it, obviously. But I also find the combination of these two movies interesting because, in a weird way, Revenge of the Sith feels like Luke is kind of building to what would have become the Clone Wars TV show. It really does feel like that to me. And I also like to randomly imagine what if the Clone Wars TV show was the first Star Wars content there ever was, and Revenge of the Sith was the series finale. And like everybody's watching this animated show, like, oh, that's what Star Wars is. And it's like, oh, by the way, we're going to make the series finale a live action movie. And it's like the most bonkers idea ever. And the best idea ever. That would be it's a crazy series finale if you look at it like that at the end of the Clone Wars.
Right.
But the Clone Wars, in a lot of ways, as this expanded universe thing, is a lot what Solo feels like to me. It feels like that sort of world and that sort of story in a lot of ways. And there are things that happen in Solo that some people were less prepared for if they weren't already a fan of the Clone Wars and
right
ancillary media. It felt like Solo was made for that expanded universe crowd, for fans of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just a fascinating dynamic with these two movies, I think.
Yeah, and I like when it comes to Solo, I think not only does it have the vibe of the Clone Wars and things like that, and like specific plot points kind of get brought up that come from that too, but it also kind of harkens to the old um, expanded universe kind of stories that came out before they, before Disney took over. That there were a lot of Star Wars stories that kind of dealt more with Han Solo or bounty hunters in general, or smugglers, that type of thing, and it's kind of fun to go back to that, kind of before we jump into it, just kind of the vibe. But it was like kind of a fun redip into that style of Star Wars. And again, I think that was something that maybe a lot of audience members weren't prepared for. Um, but it was very welcome on my end. And thinking of Revenge of the Sith as a finale to the Clone Wars is pretty interesting. There's another way to, well, not another way to look at it, but interesting thing is that like the original before the Clone Wars micro series, like the hand drawn animation they did before the CG show that was done by Jindy Tarkovsky. I think that's how you say his name, but the creator of Samurai Jack. They had a season of that like the year before Revenge of the Sith, I think. And then they had a second season that kind of led into right before Revenge of the Sith. And it actually ended with Grievous breaking into the capital and on Coruscant and kidnapping the Chancellor Palpatine. And it's like now it's picking up, it almost is like picking up the steam from that and being the finale to that story. And I remember actually watching that on Cartoon Network before, like right before it was time to go see the movie. But yeah, there's a lot of fun and interesting ways to look at both of these movies, and there's a lot of fun to be had with both of them.
But obviously very different too, in so many
Oh yeah,
ways. And
yeah,
what
yeah, very.
what stuns me, and I've said this since the beginning about Revenge of the Sith, is that I I stand by this statement that I think Revenge of the Sith is George Lucas's best directing since American Graffiti, which I feel like American Graffiti is just a phenomenal movie and might be my favorite movie to Lucas directed. Obviously, he's directed not that many movies. He was more running the company than anything.
Right.
But just in terms of his vision and it feeling like a complete thing, there's so much confidence in Revenge of the Sith and the way that it's constructed. It just really feels of a piece. It feels like Lucas, in my opinion, figured out what he wanted to do with the prequel world and the technology, and was having a lot of fun with using the CG in this movie. And there's so much freedom in it. It's so fluid. It almost feels like animation at times, even though it's a live action movie, but in a way that to me isn't distracting. It might differ per person, obviously. Mileage may vary on how people feel about it, but I really love the way this movie just moves. and flows. And it starts off with a phenomenal opening sequence
Yeah.
that's just one exciting beat to another. That whole opening stretch is just phenomenal, including the first shot of the movie, which is that extended take after the opening crawl,
Right.
which is just immediately arresting and just pulse pounding, exciting. Oh, we're in it now. The whole battle is fun to watch, and also worth mentioning that immediately more detailed than Attack of the Clones.
Yeah.
Not to diss Attack of the Clones too much, and obviously we talked plenty about it, pros and cons, in the past episode, but yeah, the amount of detail is already apparent in 3 years
Right.
and what they could accomplish, and it's, I don't know, I just really love how this movie just jumps straight in and never really lets up. It has obviously a change in pace at points, but it never feels lost. And this is one of the things that I've picked on already in episodes 1 and 2 was Ben Burtt's editing. And editing is one of my biggest things that I often pick on or not, or love about it when it works right.
Right.
And Ben Burtt's still an editor on this movie, but it's the first one that he had a co-editor, and Roger Barton. And Barton has an interesting roster as an editor, including King of the Monsters, which we recently talked about, the Godzilla movies, and he edited that movie.
Right.
But he's been an editor for Michael Bay, some directed movies and some produced movies, but Pearl Harbor and Bad Boys 2. Did Speed Racer, the undersung
Right.
Speed Racer movie.
Yeah.
It could be worth talking about that one at some point. Transformers Dark of the Moon, An Age of Extinction, Last Night, and those Transformers movies. It's such a weird roster of editing credits. But and for better and worse, almost, it seems like. But that's not to say one way or the other is Barton a good editor or not. Because if I was just judging it as an average from some of those credits, I don't know what I would say. But I can say categorically that I think Revenge of the Sith is the best edited movie of the prequels by far. And all the love in the world to Ben Burtt, who is a sound design genius. But I don't think he should have ever been a video editor on these titles. But for Revenge of the Sith, it works.
Right.
The editing is a strong suit. I don't think this movie ever really lumbers. It works and it feels concrete. I really appreciate how this movie feels like, almost like Lucas's definitive statement, because obviously on one hand it's this bridge between the prequels and the original trilogy, and Lucas wasn't done with Star Wars because he continued to do the Clone Wars TV show and was at one point trying to make the live action TV show and some other things like that.
Right.
But he nonetheless made this movie. It feels like a stamp. Like, this is Star Wars. And a lot of people make a big deal about it being dark because obviously it got a PG-13 for the first time in the Star Wars series. But even though it does definitely have some darkness in it, I had a friend that he actually said at one point the Order 66 sequence. He's like, that should have been the whole trilogy. I'm like, what? what is the story? What are you like a whole trilogy that's just Vader going around killing people and I don't know what type of trilogy that is.
Right.
But that's exactly the point though is like that's not what the series was. The whole prequels was not just let's watch Darth Vader rise and murder.
Right.
It was this actual dramatic storyline that still has a heart beating underneath it. So even though it ends on rather downbeat in some ways, there's always that hint of the hope on the horizon, and I think that's important to understanding what this movie is.
The kind of jumping on the opening that I definitely agree is fantastic. I think it's arguably I mean I'm not going to put a definitive statement or anything like that, but I definitely think it is one of the best openings of the entire saga. Um, it's got one of the best action sequences of the entire saga, and it kind of sets this tone for what the movie is going to be. And one thing I haven't really commented on, and I should have said something about it. Like I don't think tonally is the best word, maybe, but like Attack of the Clones definitely had some issues that we did talk about, where it was kind of they didn't know what to do with Anakin and Padme, and kind of the film was kind of wishy washy, kind of went back and forth. Where in this movie, it's very, like you said, Lucas is very confident, and I agree with that, and it very much knows what it wants to be and the story it wants to tell, and it's evident from kind of the hints of where it's going from the very beginning. Of course, if you were a Star Wars fan, you knew where it was going to go before the trilogy even started. You knew this was about Anakin eventually becoming Darth Vader, and that was going to be the the conclusion. We all knew that. Why it would be a whole trilogy of Vader just killing people, that sounds ridiculous. but but um but no, like we knew, like assumed that the last movie would be the fall, and it was very clear that's what it was going to be after Attack of the Clones, and the Clone Wars began. Like it was obvious that, well, he hasn't turned yet, so it's going to happen in Revenge of the Sith. And the trailers were very, telling of the tone, and the movie itself, that's ultimately where these are we get our reviews and our opinions on. You can't base opinions on trailers, but the film itself very much had a solid tone, and it starts with that first sequence, which is fun, and it is kind of a adventure. And one of the things that I've talked about missing out in Attack of the Clones was kind of that camaraderie between Obi-Wan and Anakin that we're supposed to be invested in. And we've got it here. And it's like they've been, two friends at war together for years, and we're just catching up with them in the middle of a battle, and they know what to do. They know how to help each other out. They work good as a team. It's not the constant bickering that we saw in Attack of the Clones. There's there might be disagreements, but there's much more uh, cohesiveness between them. They definitely are a team, and I like that. But the big thing here is that throne room scene really kind of sets up what's about to happen. which again, it's a great lightsaber duel or a Mexican standoff, if you will, of lightsabers with Obi-Wan and or a triple threat, I guess. Obi-Wan and Anakin against Count Dooku, but of course, we know who was going to eventually be Palpatine's apprentice. So knew Dooku wasn't going to be around much longer. So him getting dispatched of at the beginning wasn't shocking, but I do think that the way it happens and the kind of Anakin's hesitance to do it and then giving in and doing it, I think it's really strong. It really kind of sets up where we're going to go from here. It's dark, but Obi-Wan doesn't see it because he's out of commission. He's been knocked out. So he doesn't know, he doesn't sense, that darkness. So it all works really well that they're going to get blindsided by his turn later on. It's just really good way of setting the tone without dragging the adventure part of it down, because like immediately they're trying to escape the ship, and you've got General Grievous, who is this great kind of uh, Saturday morning cartoon kind of villain in a way. Yeah, he's a lot of fun. You got the coughing, the voice. He's like one of the things in that cartoon I mentioned, the original Clone Wars micro series, that they like introduced um, Grievous in that, and he was actually like kind of presented as an unstoppable force in that. And so I think some people may have had like this different perception of what Grievous was going to be like, and they may have been disappointed with what he ended up being like in the movie. But I actually love that he's kind of a coward, and despite being like this giant cyborg alien that has four arms and can wield um, multiple lightsabers and probably kill just about anybody, but he's scared. Um, that's comical to me, and I really enjoy kind of the back and forth between him and Anakin, and him and Obi-Wan, of course. And we'll talk more about that later, because I think one of the best sequences in the movie involves those two. But like that opening sequence, just a blast. Between there's so much stuff that happens. Like there's a space battle, and like one of the things I talked about in Phantom Menace was how much I was disappointed with that space battle. And like the space battle in Revenge of the Sith, like at the beginning, is really cool, even though it's kind of like we're passing through. Uh, got Anakin and Obi-Wan trying to get to the ship, then we're just kind of passing through the battle, but you still get to be a part of it. And then you have that, and then the Dooku stuff, and then General Grievous capturing them and the escape, and then them crash landing the ship in Coruscant. It's just this wonderful sequence that kind of just doesn't let up until it's over. And I think that was kind of probably what this movie needed, because it's going to have this dark ending. That it's going to have kind of an emotional climax. It's not to say that it doesn't have action, because the climax is very action packed, but it's not going to be like Attack of the Clones, where you have this huge set piece with battle and everything else going on. It's going to be more focused on characters and things like that. So you kind of really needed to start this off with a bang, and I think Lucas did exactly what he needed to, and it kind of set the stage for the rest of the movie. And I really can't speak highly enough about the beginning, and like I don't want to keep like strolling down memory lane every time uh, we talk about a movie and like when it came out and all this. But this was definitely like I was a senior. This was my senior in high school experience because this was my last day of high school, uh, and I went to the midnight show with about like 20 or 30 of my uh, classmates, and we all went and like had lightsabers and had duels in the parking lot and everything else. And there, I don't want to say the anticipation was more than Phantom Menace, but it was close. And I just remember that opening sequence, like experiencing that with my friends and like seeing their reactions, and of course having mine. Like it was definitely like a welcome thing. It was a welcome event. It was this moment that really felt like Star Wars, and I think that universally kind of made everyone think, "Oh, this is a Star Wars movie, like a real Star Wars movie." The people that maybe didn't care for the other two, not that I agree with them not feeling like Star Wars because I think they do, but I do see that, some people don't feel that way. And in some ways I can understand why, but I think that this definitely kind of had that old feel to it. And it definitely starts off this movie right. And I do think that it slows down a little bit, which it has to. Like, I don't, a lot of people complain about it being kind of boring, like after the beginning. I don't agree with that. Like, of course, you have Anakin and Padme stuff, but it's not near as atrocious as the stuff in Attack of the Clones. It's needed because you have this through line story of who their children are, and you have to be invested in what happens, and so you have to have those scenes, and I don't feel like they feel tacked on, and I do think that the chemistry between Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen is a little better in this movie, and I think their scenes together are, I mean, they're necessary, but they're also important, and they really do feel like they matter. It's not Anakin just spouting, awkward dialogue. It's them, really connected to each other and concerned about the future and where the story goes. You have to have that, and I'm about to throw it back to you. Uh, but before I do, I just want to talk about Ian McDermott, who we've mentioned in the other two. But of course, you knew he was gonna come to pull power in this one. You knew he was going to come more to the forefront, and I think he does an absolutely wonderful job of kind of playing the concerned father figure for Anakin that he tries to pass off to sell Anakin on this stuff, and also has that menacing presence at the same time. And that scene talking about Darth Plagueis, the Wise, and of course that's a meme now. Um, but the scene itself is fantastic, and the music is wonderful too. And I almost said this is probably like Another great John Williams score, of course. I think it's definitely better than the Attack of the Clones score. And I think Battle of the Heroes is a great main theme, but like this kind of uh, vocal chant type music that's going on during that opera scene, it's fantastic. And it's very kind of, gives this sinister, ominous vibe to that scene, and it's very effective. And I think that Ian McDermott was the key to like a lot of this working as much as Hayden Christensen was, but in a lot of ways more so. And of course, he delivered. And when he kind of becomes the Palpatine we all are more familiar with or had been. Toward the end, I think he's pretty great doing that as well. I do agree that there are some people that think it's a little too silly, like a little too over the top. I don't fully agree with that. There are some things that I do kind of think are silly, like I don't want to get too far into it, but the fight with Yoda, I do think like him landing like a um like he's in a Benny Hill episode on the like flipping over the chair. You just need some sound effects, all that. I do think that is kind of silly, and I think like some of his evil dialogue at the end is just a little too much. But at the same time, I think it works, and I really enjoy him in this movie, and I think it's kind of this big selling point of getting to see Palpatine in action and getting to see him at full strength, and that was something we had not, and it delivered in this movie for sure.
I think this is a tour de force for Ian McDermott. It's just everything you could possibly want for the big show for Palpatine, really.
Yeah,
Him unleashed and getting so much screen time as would be required for this story. I personally really love the story, the scene where he's confronted by Mace Windu and company, and I've seen people not care for that scene
yeah,
or think it was comical, and I guess this is where opinions can just dramatically diverge. Like how something hits you or doesn't hit you.
right.
I think it's incredible. That whole sequence, I think, is just fantastic, all the way up to the christening of Darth Vader. Just Ian McDermott is just soaking everything up, but it's also just well built around him dramatically. Uh, plus, I love that Sam Jackson keeps going on. You never saw Mace Windu die, really. You never saw where he went. Maybe he's still around. I guess it's theoretically possible, but I don't know how likely it is that we'll see Sam Jackson again in Star Wars. But you never know. Um, I just, yeah, I think Ian McDermott is just absolutely terrific in this, and I understand like like how it's comical when he flips over the chair, but uh, to me it doesn't bother me. Like it's like almost fits in the exaggerated nature of the story, like the operatic, sometimes Saturday morning cartoon vibe.
Right.
To me, like it's just the right combination of elements. It's not a perfect movie, but I think a really really like terrific movie in most ways for me. And plus, like he flips over the chair and there's some slight comedy in there, but I really love when it opens up and you realize where exactly they are, and you see the Senate,
Yeah.
and just the epic scope of that, and then watching Lucas have fun blowing everything up,
Right.
because that's a lot of what this movie is too. Is like establishing this prequel world and then blowing it up, and that's something that I think Revenge of the Sith does incredibly well. I also want to shout out again General Grievous, but specifically Matthew Wood, who has been Burt protege and has done some amazing sound work all his own, and continued in that vein. But done a lot of voices, and doing the voice of Grievous, I think he does a terrific job.
Yeah.
I really like General Grievous, and again I like the cartoonish kind of vibe as well.
Yeah.
Not to mention hello there,
Right.
echoing back to A New Hope when Obi-Wan
Yeah.
says that, which obviously we'll talk about A New Hope specifically soon enough. But Ewan McGregor is aces throughout the entire prequel trilogy, and seeing him at this stage it's interesting because he's obviously echoing Alec Guinness at so many points, but he does his own thing
Right.
too. I think he's really had made the character his own, especially by this movie. I think he's a terrific Obi-Wan, and I'm getting excited thinking about the TV series, whatever that will exactly look like.
Yeah.
Which will also, of course, bring back Hayden Christensen, and whatever that means.
Right.
I have no idea what that means and what that story is, but I'm excited to find out. Especially, yeah, just to know where it fits in the timeline precisely.
Right.
I guess we'll find out, but it's probably not going to be that magnificent mane that Hayden Christensen has
No.
in Revenge of the Sith. If he ever needed a sign that he wasn't going to be a regular Jedi just sitting on the council, I don't think that hairstyle fits in the schema of a traditional Jedi.
No.
That could have been a whole conversation. Like, why don't you go to the Jedi barber? Anakin, like, you kind of got a lot of big hair happening. But no, I think it's fantastic. Just on that front as well, like stylistically. I think Hayden Christensen's good in this movie, but sometimes you get people that have like I mean, obviously you can have a different opinion just in general, but I think sometimes people get on a whirl of what they think about something and just kind of run with it and not give it a chance to grow.
Right.
And people had this impression like Hayden Christensen is bad and we don't like him as Anakin, and never even gave him the time of day. I enjoy his tragic arc in here, and the way it's all built up to as well, including with General Grievous as this sign of what humanity could be lost.
Right.
That's something that's ever present in this story. This, like you look at the Jedi, and of course, what they haven't fully realized yet themselves is this idea of the Force ghost, and really kind of having a power after life that's not completely life, but is this spiritual kind of thing, and can still be a guide. But then you have the Sith who are prolonging life at all costs, and that they're ultimately not hanging on to humanity or to even their physical selves. Like they're just kind of willing to hang on to life in spite of anything else, in spite of whatever destruction it might cause. Which also reminds me of Harry Potter and Voldemort splitting up his soul into the Horcruxes. But
Right.
I think that comparison is really apt and something that has existed to some degree in Star Wars, but you really kind of see it explored in Revenge of the Sith, including that Darth Plagueis scene, which is one of those scenes that is just haunting and ambient, but also like I want to know more because it suggests so much about Palpatine's past,
Right.
but doesn't actually go there. It's like, what is this complete backstory, and what is the immaculate birth of Anakin? And it seems to tie these things together, but doesn't really go there too. It doesn't fully go there.
Right.
Makes you really wonder this complete story. But nonetheless, as far as thematic material is concerned, it's a terrific comparison between the Jedi and the Sith and how they approach life and how they approach death. I think that's kind of this powerful through line, really, just comparing the two. And worth mentioning Natalie Portman, of course, who I think is good in this movie, but is obviously relegated to being the pregnant woman in the background in
Right.
some ways too, which is how that goes, obviously, but not in a bad way. Certainly not in a bad way, but it's a good capper to her run in the prequels as well, in a way that obviously is one of the most tragic. Even though it might make you wonder, again, skip it ahead to Return of the Jedi and tell me about your mother. And it's like, oh, I remember when
Yeah.
I never knew her.
Right.
But yeah, there are things like that, of course, all the way through the series. Little things that maybe don't completely track. From a certain point of view, they don't track. But yeah, I think this movie is just a really terrific capper to the entire prequel trilogy, and I think the cast all steps up in general. And I mean, I'll also just randomly shout out to Bruce Spence, who is one of the reasons this movie got some notice for its makeup, and that's the only Academy Award nomination this movie had, was for its makeup, which is just weird to me. This movie deserved way more attention than just for its makeup. Like, it's a stellar production, I guess. To some people, it steps so far into the world of cartoon that they weren't wanting to give it credit as a live action movie.
Right.
But I think it's really well engineered. I don't know how you can't give this movie credit for at least its technical notes, visual effects, and sound, and just a well constructed movie. I also like the sequence where Anakin and Padme are sensing each other and kind of looking out over the cityscapes
Yeah.
at a distance. it's just got this. The pacing of the movie works because even if it's not all action packed, it's exactly the thing. It's like it's got this balance to it that, in my opinion, never is boring. Maybe some people think, like you mentioned, it maybe there are parts of it that are boring. I don't think it ever is. I think the drama of it has this nice lull to it, this nice haunting vibe that accentuates the action.
Right.
And when the action does hit, it's opera with exploding lava in the background. Like, I will say that the end fight maybe goes on just a little too long.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I appreciate the drama of it.
Right.
So that's, to me, this back and forth of things, like, and plus the pacing helps. I don't think it ever lets off the gas. You mix all those things together. I think it generally works.
Yeah.
And overall, I really appreciate it. I really like too this is the Star Wars movie with the most planets, and it's all over the place, which it had to be in a lot of ways. I mean, the story itself is, this galaxy spanning thing. You have the wars happening, but you also have events that affect the entire galaxy. So it makes sense that you would need to be across the galaxy to get a sense of that. But Lucas spares no expense in getting you to all these different worlds that are just really gorgeous and
Right.
really colorful movie in just the right ways. I think it's just a really good looking movie too, on top of everything else. I honestly would give this movie a solid A. I really dig this movie. It's not perfect. It's not obviously as good as the original trilogy, but I also think it deserves its due as an excellent Star Wars movie, on its own right, just a good fun movie, but also this really great piece of Star Wars lore as well. I think it handles this big moment in the timeline extraordinarily well.
Yeah. Kind of picking up around the duel itself. I'll just go right to that and kind of talk about a couple of my big criticisms of this one, because they really, I don't really have too many, but the ones that I have are just, I'm not going to say major, but they do matter a little bit to me and kind of take this one down a notch from being what I think it could be. And I do think the duel is built up extremely well. I think we kind of see, and like I mentioned at the beginning, like the chemistry between Ewan and Hayden and the characters of Anakin and Obi-Wan was great in that opening sequence. So when there's tension between them and in the Jedi Council debacle and everything going on, um, it kind of plants the seeds and builds up for this ultimate confrontation. And when it finally happens, and again, this is one of those things that everybody knew about, that Anakin and Obi-Wan had this huge duel, and it was on a volcanic planet, and somehow Obi-Wan beat him. And there was something in Star Wars lore that had been mentioned, and people knew about it and been speculating what it would be like for years. So it had all this anticipation around it. It was one of the things that I think probably carried the most pressure of this just has to be, fantastic because it has all this built around it. And I think like from the get-go it starts off and it's fantastic. The choreography is great, and the emotions and the music. Like I said, Battle of the Heroes is a great theme, and it's prevalent in this scene. And we get some reemergences of Duel of the Fates, and we get some Imperial March thrown in there as well. And I think that the emotional beats are there and the desperation. I love like when they use the force push on each other at the same time. It's a really
Yeah.
cool beat to it, and kind of their just kind of the desperation their fighting style, because it's not like in the other duels or other things we've seen them do. They've kind of been confident even when they've been beaten. They're kind of calm and calculated, and um, in this it's a little more savage, and it's because like they know each other, they know and it's then they're kind of evenly matched. And even though Anakin's the most powerful Jedi by you know by a long shot, Obi-Wan isn't. He's not a scrub, and he's also just a skilled lightsaber duelist, and we get to see that. And so they kind of know each other's tricks and secrets, and kind of see them try to get the best of the other. It really does play a huge impact. Now, when they start Tarzan swinging and jumping on platforms on that, it doesn't lose me. I'm not gonna say that I just it completely ruins it, because I don't think it does. I do think it dumbs it down, and I do think that it keeps what from possibly would be my favorite lightsaber duel of the whole saga from becoming that, because I do think that it kind of gets a little out of hand, and I do agree that it goes a little long. And like the whole time, another thing that was built up um, was how Obi-Wan actually beat Anakin. And I remember on like one of the special features, I think it's freaking Rick McCallum going like, "Well, everyone's always wondered how Obi-Wan won, and it's because he had the high ground." Because I guess they had these on the internet uh, before the movie, because I remember seeing it before. I'm thinking, okay, like, is he talking like the moral high ground, or like, is there some kind of, uh, trick? No, he's standing on top of a hill, and then Anakin jumps over him. And I think that's really, it's still an emotional moment, and I think what keeps that scene being good is the immediately after, like the moment after, like what happens next that sells it. But the actual moment where it ends is the worst part of it to me. Like, it's just okay. He's standing on top of a hill. You jump over him. He cuts your legs and your arms off. Like, this is this profound high ground, Rick McCallum. Like, I always thought that was ridiculous. And you were talking about yes men around George Lucas last episode. Rick McCallum was like the jester of these, because he was the definite yes man to George through this whole trilogy, the producer. So, but but I do think that the you're my brother, Anakin. That stuff is great, and you do feel the the sense of loss for Obi-Wan, and then of course the complete like disillusionment and change in Anakin that he can't see past his own hatred and all that that he is truly gone over to the dark side. And I think that's powerful. But again, I think there is a little bit of just a little bit of weakness in that duel. But again, I still think it's a great sequence and or a really good sequence. And another thing I kind of have problem with, and again, this goes back to what you were saying about Palpatine's big scene with Mace Windu and Kit Fisto and the other Jedi. And I really like that too because it escalates so quickly and it is sinister. And I think it's cool kind of seeing him just immediately turn it on and start killing them left and right. And I do I do like the whole setup. I do like the music in that setup too. Um, and Anakin trying to concentrate and everything. I think that like the build up to this and the actual turn and everything and how that scene plays out and what happens in Mace Windu, I think all of that's done extremely well. I think the one part of that kind of you know I lose it or not lose it or loses me, but like feels just a little forced is like the name. Like Palpatine kind of pulls like Vader out of thin air. And not that it has to be this profound moment, but it's just like and you shall be Darth Vader. That sounds cool. Like that moment's a little silly to me in a otherwise like really good scene. Um, there are a couple of things like that, and Anakin kind of. I mean, and I don't think. Again, this is kind of tricky because I feel pretty strongly about it that a positive, but there are a couple of things. Like I do think that it makes sense. Anakin does what he does, but I also think like he immediately just throws himself over to Palpatine in service. Like I'll do anything. Like he was hesitant like 5 seconds ago, and then like immediately turns. In some ways, I get it and I buy it. In other ways, it's. I think he would be a little more hesitant, but I don't know. It's still a good scene, and I still like it. But those are kind of my criticisms. Is just where I think it kind of falls just a little short of greatness, but otherwise the the amazing sequence that is the Order 66 with some great music again, great music by John Williams.
Who?
Fantastic. This is one of his, you know, I'm not going to say one of his best scores because he's done so many great ones, but this is some amazing stuff here and the emotions when these Jedi are getting wiped out and Anakin marching on the temple and all that, just a amazing sequence. And like I think moments like that are what elevate this one, and this is easily the best of the prequels. I and some people are like, oh, that's not a compliment. Well, I don't think that's a bad thing to say because I like both of the other movies, even though I don't rank them as highly as I would the original trilogy. I still think the prequels are worth something. And I definitely rank this the top of those, and I think that this isn't that far off from the original trilogy in some ways. Like it's kind of hitting that ballpark of what I wanted and what really, not just that, but like what really makes me feel something. And but ultimately I think I'm gonna fall like at an A minus for it. And just because like they're just those little hang ups that I had with it that are pretty important parts of the story. And but again, it's an A. It's still in the A ballpark. It's a really good, uh, really great movie and really enjoyable. The big sequence I want to talk about, and you mentioned Bruce Spence, and hilariously, like he was in trilogy like part threes, like that whole like early 2000s, because he was of course in Revenge of the Sith, and then he was the train man in Matrix Revolutions,
Yeah.
and then Return of the King Extended Edition. He was the mouth of Sauron. Um, so he'd gotten all these like part three roles. This was probably I don't know. I like the mouth of Sauron, but this was way cooler than the Train Man. in Matrix Revolutions, but I like his character here. But that Utapau sequence is great. Of course, the hello there and all that, but the adventure, Obi-Wan taking on Grievous and that whole battle and everything, and then the Order 66 happening, and um, Obi-Wan kind of having to hide out and escape. I think that is a great sequence, and it's one of the best parts of the movie to me. And you know, it's wonderful, and I do agree with you. I love the amount of planets we see. We see so many, just like in that Order 66 sequence, like seeing all the Jedi where they are as they are betrayed. And of course, we went to Kashyyyk, had that battle there. That's where Yoda is. Um, it, it was cool to see that. And Chewbacca, uh, cool to see a young Chewbacca in this, or younger. Um, I don't know, just really enjoyable, emotional, pretty impactful, like capper to this trilogy. And um, I do think that it's a strong entry in the whole saga. I do think that it doesn't get its due a lot. I think there are a lot of people that do give it its due too. Like especially now, the time has been, like we said, been kind to the prequels a little bit, like because now it's popular to bash the sequel trilogy to some, just to be contrarian for some people. Some people genuinely don't like them, but like like oh, the prequels were great now. That attitude's kind of emerged, but like Revenge of the Sith was always kind of the one that everybody was the most popular, or the one that most people considered to be the best. And a lot of people, there is still a lot of people consider it to be their favorite Star Wars movie. And I don't knock that opinion at all. I think it's a really good movie for sure. For myself, there's a few things that kind of fall flat, but otherwise it's kind of Lucas firing on all cylinders, and it's just a really, really good movie.
Couple things I'll mention in reference to what you said. First of all, that Grievous Obi-Wan fight is cool, but it's also the closest we'll come to seeing Spielberg direct Star Wars.
Yeah.
Because he did, I guess, the animatics for that sequence, or at least the very beginning of that sequence. And I think it's pretty evident, too. It has Spielberg's kind of flair there for a moment as Grievous is approaching Obi-Wan, and it's pretty terrifying. Terrifying to imagine that machine energy coming at you with multiple lightsabers.
Right.
Definitely kind of a horror image. But also, I was going to mention Anakin's turn, and this is, again, one of those things that it could depend on how it hits you tonally and so on, how good you think it is or isn't. To me, it works because he, first of all, has been groomed for so long by Palpatine. So he's kind of warmed up to the guy, and also has conflict with the Jedi Council as well.
Right.
So he's trying to find his allegiance, but I don't think he's like completely won over by Palpatine either. I don't think he completely agrees with them, but he's been convinced that this is the path I need to take to protect those I love, to save people from death. And he's so convinced of that he's willing to go on this ride with Palpatine and then eventually overthrow him. And that's the plan.
Right.
And like that's in the back of his mind is, I don't fully trust this Palpatine guy, but I do think he has some lessons that fit my current worldview.
Right.
And can benefit me. I mean, I could see how it could hit someone different ways and how effectively he is or isn't on the dark side. But I feel like for me, there's just enough there that I buy his turn, and as it goes too, like whenever Obi-Wan and Padme first land on Mustafar, and he has this kind of warmth to him for a moment, he's like, oh, Padme, he still has that side of him that's there, but that sense of betrayal pushes him
right
too far. My point is, I think you can still sense that mixture of humanity to his darkness, and for me, it works. But obviously, we're in similar territory with this movie. I feel like so far we've been exactly on this, like one notch above for me. I feel like that's been exactly where we are so far, which is interesting. Like we're basically feeling very close to the same thing, but I'm just like that notch above for each of the movies so far. That just slight extra credit for me, I guess. But it's always how a movie's going to hit you.
Right.
And what works and what doesn't work. But I guess it's time we could start talking about Solo.
You're after something. Is it revenge? Money? Or is it something else?
Heard about a job. Big shot gangster putting together crew.
I'm a driver, and I'm a flyer. I waited a long time for a shot like this. What do you think? Well, what do you know?
If you come with us, you're in this life for good.
You might want to buckle up, baby.
Here they come! Let me give you some advice. Assume everyone will betray you, and you will never be disappointed.
I got a really good feeling about this.
When do you know how to fly?
190 years old? You look great.
Push it! So glad we took this job!
Which, again, 13 years after Revenge of the Sith, this movie comes out. And it's one of the strangest behind-the-scenes stories for a Star Wars movie, because it, at one time, was being directed by not Ron Howard.
Right.
And but ultimately it's Ron Howard gets full credit. So that means that according to Guild rules, he directed most of the movie as it stands. So that is what it is. But I think it's weird though. Like, I get it, and I don't at the same time. When you think about behind the scenes of this movie, it's this battle between creativity and commerce. So just thinking about this from a commercial standpoint, without even discussing the quality of the movie for a second, I don't understand why they ever thought this movie was going to make the same amount as the other Star Wars movies.
Right.
Like, I get that they just had a run of billion-dollar hits. So I guess they said, oh, new Star Wars movie, $1 billion. But when you're a suit, when you're a person at the top of the corporate ladder, it's just weird to me that you don't recognize how Solo is different than a main saga movie.
Right.
You know, it's a very different animal. And on top of that, you're trying to convince people this is a new Han Solo. That's kind of a big ask, to try to convince people to buy into somebody that's not Harrison Ford to be Han Solo.
Right.
People have to be convinced this isn't just like fan fiction-y.
Yeah.
Like, Harrison Ford is iconically Han Solo. So how do you convince people this isn't just some silly little adventure and that it's actually a movie worth catching on its own? This movie did find an audience once it was on Netflix, and now it's on Disney Plus.
Right.
Once it was available on people's streaming services, they were like, oh, this is really cool, actually. And I think it's interesting now we live in this world where Lando is going to be a TV show.
Right.
And possibly picking up the threads from this that are left behind at the end of this movie. I hope so, because I really dig this movie.
Yeah.
And I really dig the stuff that it sets up. So I hope that the Lando show is at least partially a sequel to this movie, and some of the hanging threads there left behind. This feels like an expanded universe story. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, it feels like something that's a great little adventure, but it's not a main title, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense.
Right.
I just mean that it's got that kind of vibe to it, and it kind of plays off of that too, especially at the end when Darth Maul pops up and ignites his lightsaber.
Right.
And just so we have a lightsaber in this movie, I guess. Just in case you didn't know who I was from my face and my voice.
Right.
Remember my lightsaber? Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, Darth Maul. But some people were like, oh, really? Darth Maul? How is he back? And meanwhile, other Star Wars fans are like, are you kidding me? Like,
Right.
he's been back. It's really cool. Had to catch some people up. But this movie kind of hit the diehards more than it hit at least immediately hit the diehards before anybody else discovered it. So this movie was considered a bit of a financial failure. But it's because the big corporate bosses thought it was going to make $1 billion. So they thought, sure, why not? Let's reset and hire a new director and refilm a bunch of stuff.
Right.
And this movie ended up costing a lot more money than it already cost, and it was already a huge budget. I just want to give a shout out to Lucas again, just because he after the first movie, he independently produced the Star Wars movies.
Right.
And he kept the budgets, like, not that they were small, but they were actually pretty tight considering how big similar big budget movies were and are. You know, he kept them a lot tighter than plenty of other movies. Because he was smart about how to run his ship.
Right.
And this movie is like the opposite of that in terms of concern about being careful
Right.
with the money behind the scenes. Having said that, you ultimately look at this movie and it's like Ron Howard directed, written by Lawrence Kasdan and Jonathan Kasdan, but this feels very Star Wars.
Right.
You know, like this is, I mean, in a lot of ways, people have looked back at like Lawrence Kasdan, and I've seen people talk about, oh, he should have been more involved with Return of the Jedi and involved with the series beyond that, maybe, instead of letting Lucas run away with it by himself more on the prequels, especially. And people have pointed to Kasdan as one of those figures, and they brought Kasdan back for Force Awakens, which we'll talk about in a few episodes. And then he got the chance to do Solo, which definitely feels like a Lawrence Kasdan kind of story.
Yeah.
To tell the young Han Solo adventures. That's a really cool thing. That's a really cool vibe. That's intimately tied to the history of this saga, and Ron Howard's a big director, so it's weird. Like, this movie has an interesting vibe in terms of feeling like the underdog in a way, while at the same time involving all these really big figures. And it has big adventure in it, but it's also kind of slight too.
Right.
Relatively speaking. Like, even though it has some big images, it doesn't end with a big space battle. It ends with blaster and gun and a knife. You know, that's a far more intimate fight and sort of vibe than a traditional Star Wars movie. But I think to the benefit of the story, I really like the idea of, you know, space pirates and the underworld and thieves and criminals, rogues. That's definitely a Star Wars that I enjoy, and I really dig what this movie is and what it does.
Yeah, I definitely kind of agree with that last point for sure. That this is, you know, it kind of feel. I mean, the best way to put it, even though it's not entirely true, is that it is kind of just standalone Star Wars. It is kind of to itself. It's slight in that way that it's not, you know, part of a bigger arc. It's not part of the saga. It's kind of, you know, just an adventure. And but I think it very confidently in a lot of ways uses the, you know, canvas that is the Star Wars universe very well, and is able to kind of, you know, do its own thing with it. And I like that, and I wish that more Um, I wish that it was more successful, for one, because I would like to see more things like it. And, we may get more through Disney Plus with the Lando show, depending on what exactly they do with that, because we don't really know any details other than it's been announced.
Live action Lando.
Yeah,
That's all we
yeah,
know.
that's it. But, there's a lot in this that I really do enjoy. And the thing is, and this is going to be a point that I make again in the very next episode, is that I wasn't really looking forward to this one, because I didn't really think that a Han Solo movie was really something that I would be interested in. And it's not because I don't like Han Solo, because I do. I think he's a great character. But what do you do with a Han Solo movie? Or to be more specific, what do you do with a Han Solo prequel? Do you just kind of cheaply show how he saves Chewbacca? You cheaply, just throw all this stuff together. And they ended up doing it in a way that is very organic, and it also kind of makes you kind of fall in love with the character again. But the other thing was other the other caution I had, or the hesitance I had, was that, why do a prequel? Why show Han Solo when you really kind of see his arc from who he was before in A New Hope? You've seen enough of his older days. Why do you need to see more? But but I was proven wrong, is what I'm really trying to say, because I really do enjoy this movie, and I really enjoy the story they tell with his early days in Corellia, of him escaping from that gang, and you get the Ron Howard vibes right off the bat, because that really kind of has some Willow echoes to me, with the hounds and all that kind of stuff in at the beginning of Willow. Kind of have that here with them hunting Han and Kiara, or Kira, and I don't know, I really like the look of Corellia. I like that it's kind of this polluted planet. I love it's run by the underground. I love those aspects to it. Um, like, you know, I like him as Han, and let's see, I'm going to try to pronounce his last name, Alden Ehrenrich, but he does a good job as Han. I think another hesitance is that, the expectation would be to imitate Harrison Ford, and you really, Harrison Ford is Harrison Ford. You're not going to be able to duplicate it, and if you try, people are going to tear you apart for it. So I don't think he does that. I do think that, there are certain aspects that he had to, try to replicate, but he doesn't try to completely base his performance on Harrison Ford. And I think he does a really good job of kind of putting his feet down and making the character his own. And, maybe he doesn't do it quite as well as Harrison Ford, which who would? Um, Harrison Ford is one of the greatest, actors, greatest leading men of all time. You got big shoes to fill. But for this kind of standalone younger adventure story, he does a great job. And I like seeing the journey of him as a character, like escaping that world, kind of joining the Empire. And one of the big things I love about this one is that it's like one of the few instances where the Empire isn't really portrayed as just like outright evil. I mean, they definitely, end up in entanglements and all that, but like really, the Empire is just kind of like they're a force to be reckoned with, but they're not like just out murdering everybody or anything like that. It's very different portrayal of the Empire, and I really kind of enjoy that to it. I really like the way that Han meets Chewbacca. I love that kind of little they get locked together in that pit, and but end up um, befriending each other. It was a uh, great way, a great twist on how that happened. That was something I was kind of dreading, was like the way they would have them meet and all of that and how it would play out. But I actually love Chewbacca in this movie, um, and I love their relationship in it. It's it's probably like one of the more, I think, like when it comes to tone, like I think this is one of the closest to A New Hope in that it's just kind of pure adventure. Um, and like the a lot of the other ones kind of get soaked up in lore and other things going on, but this one is just kind of we're going, this is pure adventure. And I really enjoy that aspect of it. I love Woody Harrelson. I like him as Beckett. I uh, i like the nature of the character. I love Andy Newton. Uh, anytime she's in anything, she's great. A huge fan of her. I like her character, and like that train sequence and everything that happens with that. Like that, I think that's a fantastic sequence. Um, and I think it's really like the movie itself. It's really underrated. It's one of the better like little set pieces of, I mean, I'll just say the whole Star Wars series. I really enjoy it. Um, but like it kind of takes a dark turn and some little things that you're not expecting, and there are little emotional beats in this that really kind of rev it up a little bit and put it in categories that I didn't, that I wasn't expecting it to go. Amelia Clark is really good in this. You know, well, of course, Daenerys Targaryen, famous for that. For Game of Thrones, she's wonderful in that, and she's good in this though, and really kind of plays a very different kind of role. And I like her relationship with Han. Um, I like its complications. I like just the whole crime syndicate stuff in general, and it's one of the things that I really enjoy about Star Wars that doesn't get explored in the movies as much, and I'm glad this one it did. Is that some of those crime syndicates are really cool, and kind of seeing them play out the way they do is what makes this a lot of fun. And again, um, you got Paul Bettany playing Voss, and he's originally was going to be played by Michael Kenneth Williams in the original version of the movie with Lord and Miller, but they, he couldn't do the reshoots, so they got Paul Bettany. It's like, you traded out one great actor for another, so you didn't get. It's not like Paul Bettany's some scrub. but he comes in and plays Voss, and I think he's a really kind of cool villain. I don't think he stands out as much as some of the better villains in Star Wars. But he is cool, and I like kind of his motivations, and I like his connection with Kira, and I like kind of what he holds over her and how that finale kind of plays out. I really enjoy all that. And that kind of leads, to a character that we've talked about. Or you mentioned who shows up at the end, Darth Maul. Talking about those underground connections when Darth Maul kind of took over, and he's kind of behind the boss behind Kira, and I love that reveal, and I wish we could have seen more of Darth Maul. Maybe we will, but he's kind of the he becomes kind of a crime lord in the in between, in between time, Clone Wars, after Clone Wars. He does come back after his thing with Kenobi, and I like that reveal at the end. But I do agree with you; it is kind of silly. He ignites his lightsaber just to remind you of who he is. That part is kind of dumb. But otherwise, like a really cool reveal at the end, and just I don't know. This movie, it's a lot of fun. It does kind of fall short in some ways, but like for what it is, for kind of the standalone adventure, it really is a lot of fun, and it does exactly what it needs to. And for me, it's going to be my other A minus. It's two A minuses the same episode, but this one really kind of came out a little higher for me than I expected the first time I watched it, and subsequent viewings, because I really do enjoy it, and it's a lot better than I was ever expecting it to be.
We'll mark this as the first one that we have a complete agreement on the rating for whatever little that's worth. Yeah, this is an A minus for me as well. Yeah, like I said, ratings are somewhat particular to the person, and sometimes it's more important to hear what a person says than just precisely the rating they give in terms of the exact rating.
Right.
But, nonetheless, it is telling what people will give a movie ratings wise, and this one is also an A minus for me. I will mention Erin Kellyman, or however exactly you pronounce her name, Enfys Nest.
Yes.
And whenever she takes off her helmet, like it's like you don't know who this character actually is and what they represent, then you find out it's this innocentish looking person, which I guess is Ron Howard's statement of redheads are okay, don't be scared of us. But like she popped up again recently in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I couldn't erase her as Enfys Nest. Like I hope I can see her in other things so that I can disassociate, because she's very starkly present in my mind as from this movie. But I do think that's a really good character and a good way of looking at the way this world operates in the Imperial rule, the post Revenge of the Sith era, where this story ends up actually having a lot of import in terms of Han Solo actually is the good guy,
right?
As Kira says at one point. Like he's very much a rogue and has that sort of criminal vibe, but ultimately deep down he's a good person, and that's evident throughout the entire story. Like I think it's very true to the Han Solo character, but in a way that never feels cheap.
Right.
But seeing him ultimately help out the rebellion, that's a cool touch.
Yeah.
Maybe not a cool touch is how we get the name Solo. But
yeah,
even if that's not a good touch, it's so slight. It's such a small moment in the scheme of the entire story that it's far from ruining the movie.
Right.
But I will say that the title alone is kind of a weird title, really. like sure, you might call Han Solo just Solo in the world of the story. And if you're talking about Star Wars and everybody knows you're talking about Star Wars. But Solo in and of itself, like he's Han Solo.
Right.
I don't know what they should have called this movie for a fact, but Solo is kind of a strange title for a movie too, on top of the other concerns of trying to convince an audience to come in to watch this movie.
Right.
But it works at home. And hopefully the Lando story picks up some of these storylines, because this movie is just so fun.
Yeah.
It's that adventure vibe. It's really cool. Like it ultimately does do a lot of the things as you were mentioning that you'd expect it to do. Han Solo, and let's have him meet Chewbacca and acquire the Falcon, and have him do the Kessel Run.
Yeah.
Like those are all Star Wars lore things that we know about him, or know had to have happened at some point, and we get to see them as fan check marks. And I'm not a fan of being catered to as a fan necessarily.
Right.
Like I don't need the fan servicey stuff. I want a good story, but this is a good story. It does it really eloquently. And that you mentioned the Chewbacca introduction. How fun is that?
Yeah.
That's such a fun and funny sequence that also has its tongue in cheek just enough.
Right.
And if you're going to have a character that is the person who kind of tells Han Solo what's up a little bit, somebody that he can riff off of a bit, who better than Woody Harrelson?
Right.
That's pretty perfect. And even when we have that guy, he's revealed as having these human, genuine touches.
Yeah.
And that's really important, that you actually have the time and space to deal with these people as people. I appreciate that this movie has a more traditional pace.
Yeah.
I really actually like the pacing of this movie a great deal. And honestly, when people talk about like what is Star Wars, what they like in Star Wars, sometimes people will often reference the gritty, rundown kind of world, and Solo kind of fits into that. But honestly, like in theory, that kind of turns me off, not because I don't like that vibe in itself, but because that's not inherently what I need Star Wars to be.
Right.
But this movie does that right, and that's kind of why I think Ron Howard ended up being a perfect director for it. I think he guided this ship well.
Yeah.
Into something that felt really traditional, and fun too. But it has this vibe that isn't begging for you to be impressed, I guess. It's and I had to reference also like the cinematography, which I think is kind of sneaky in terms of being good. Bradford Young is actually a really terrific cinematographer. And this movie got a lot of criticism for how dark it was at parts, but I think some of that has to do with your projectors and or how bright your screen is, and um, to some degree,
Right.
um, it's actually, I think, a good-looking movie. Not my favorite in terms of visual style in the series, uh, but really uniquely done movie.
Yeah.
It's got a cool vibe, a cool, fun adventure vibe to it, uh, and I really like the cast of this movie, the ancillary characters that are new, but also getting to see Donald Glover and Alden Ehrenreich
Yeah.
take on these characters we've known for so long and just own them. Donald Glover owns Lando.
Yeah.
Like, he's perfect. And I really loved when Donald Glover was talking about meeting Billy D. Williams and maybe wanting some advice, some insight in this character he's about to play. And Billy D. Williams is just like, be cool, you know.
Yeah.
It's essentially just like that's the trick. Um, yeah. Uh, how much thought do you think Billy D. Williams put into it when he played the part before?
Right.
But no, that doesn't have to be a bad thing or anything. And I think Donald Glover does add layers to the part. And I also love Phoebe Waller-Bridge a great deal, and how that ties ultimately into the funny language of the Falcon.
Right.
Like when 3PO ties in later. Um, yeah, I the droids have always been an important part of the story, and this is a fun droid that Phoebe Waller-Bridge gets to play here with the little rebellion and everything. That's a fun
Right.
sequence where they have their rebellion. It's a lot of really good staging too, tossing of blasters and so on, but also the emotional ties where Chewbacca sees the other Wookiees and wants to help. And
Yeah.
I like the way that this world feels like we actually get a sense of the ground level of this world, and uh, everybody feeling kind of rooted to the world.
Yeah.
It feels lived in, and you kind of get a sense of where all these characters fit into it.
The Kessel Run ends up becoming like this. It almost reminds me of like an old, like 70s, 60s, 70s, like road movie, like Smokey and the Bandit or something, like where they're on this, this big run, and they got all sorts of stuff going on trying to get to certain parts of the galaxy, and there's imperial entanglements, there's all this stuff going on, it keeps stacking up, but it's just like a fun, it's never like a threatening, like tense type thing. It's like this fun adventure. We're on the run, we're in the ship, and it keeps that progress and pacing, and only takes time to breathe, here and there, but it's pretty relentless. And it's it should be noted we actually saw this together, um, on IMAX.
In the before times.
Right. And we both, we both enjoyed it. That I remember, like, just kind of getting that vibe, that knowing we, sometimes you can just sense when someone's liking a movie are feeling the vibe. Just even not even looking, just you can kind of tell, and it was like kind of tell we were both digging it at a certain point. And I think it was definitely in that point of the movie. Uh, we've gotten that far and invested in it, and it's all just becoming a big adventure. I really enjoyed all that, and I liked Lando. Already mentioned Donald Glover, and I agree. He does a great job, and he does own the character. He makes it his own. And I really do hope that we'll get to see him come back in this Lando series, because again, there hasn't been much detail. Um, because who knows if he would want to, or if they scheduling he'd be able to. But I really hope that it all works out, that they're able to get. I imagine they will be able to get him back, and um, we'll be able to see kind of a different story, things from Lando's point of view, and maybe see a little bit more of these underworld stories that they kind of left, um, like with Darth Maul and Kira. Maybe they'll get Amelia Clark back. I don't know, but see these things play out. Uh, I really, I'm glad you mentioned Infest Nest, because I think that was one of that was kind of the thing that elevated this movie for me, was those little touches of like humanity, and like the reveal that they're kind of almost these orphan type characters. And then you got Warwick Davis with like huge gun and all this other stuff.
Weasel.
Yeah. But I really enjoy that. I really enjoy Infest Nest, and um, a really cool character, um, really cool look, design, everything else. Um, but I like that ending. I like the betrayal, the double crossing. Um, in a lot of ways, this is almost Han Solo's Casino Royale. I wouldn't go that far, uh, but like there are certain elements of it that are similar. Uh, that you know kind of see why he is how he is in a certain way. When he gets double crossed, two or three times there at the end. Um, but I I like his thing with Beckett. I like their kind of finale with that, and I like that shootout. People will, you know, balk at the whole Han shot first thing and connections to that. I think that's only going to slap you in the face if you're thinking about it, and that's all. Like if you never knew anything about Han shot first, or that whole thing, and I almost refuse to even acknowledge like that kind of debate, because I think it's silly. Um, but like that they actually kind of showed that origin of that. I don't know. I like what they did, and I think some people will think it's silly, and some people might think it's stupid. But I like that ending, and I like how things tied up with him and Beckett. Um, I also I just really enjoyed the music in this, and John Williams actually like composed the theme, the Adventures of Han. Um, the rest was John Powell, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, But again, this is kind of really rousing adventure score, and I don't know if I would put it up with some of the best Star Wars films, but it does have a good score and made it really enjoyable. I just love the adventure feeling of this movie. It's almost not quite Indiana Jones, but it's like just a pure adventure movie, and I love that it just kind of asks you to to let go and go with it, and it does. It doesn't make you. It doesn't sacrifice quality for that. It maintains that, but it allows you to just go along. It has character, it has heart, and it has the emotional roots you need to get invested in it. But it doesn't, overstay its welcome. It keeps things flowing, and it's a good time.
Yeah, I think it's just a fun movie if you vibe with it. You know, uh, if you're gonna be really picky, it's not the very, very tip top of Star Wars, but I, I
Right.
I really love it. I really enjoy it. I'm glad that it exists. The only thing that's frustrating is that it works well onto its own, but it very much sets up sequels. Or at the very least sets up follow up storylines.
Right. Right.
Even if you could theoretically just be like, well, it's just a suggestion that he's going to end up with Jabba,
Yeah.
and that's where we pick up with them in A New Hope. And oh well, that's Darth Maul. We've seen him in other stories elsewhere. It's not like there isn't enough other Star Wars content or stories out there, but I really like what this particular movie does, and these particular actors and people involved, and um, the question of whether Lando will pick up these pieces, if Ron Howard will return, if his daughter will direct episodes of the series, considering that she's been
Right.
over in The Mandalorian already. Um, I appreciate that too. I appreciate Bryce Dallas Howard and Ron Howard being part of current day Star Wars. Um, that's all fun. I I understand where this movie fits in this weird paradigm of uh, Star Wars history, because like when we did see it in the IMAX opening night, it wasn't the most packed crowd,
Right.
but people have discovered it with time, um,
Yeah.
and and hopefully that's a good sign as far as the Disney Plus world that we live in now.
Right.
I think, yeah, I think it's in a good place now. But yeah, that's an interesting double feature, though. Even though they don't have exactly the same tone, obviously they're very different
Right.
in terms of the types of movies that they are. But uh, I do think it's interesting to look at this time in the Star Wars universe. Even if I'd like to see even more types of things explored,
Right.
more places in the timeline. I think that's one of the other frustrating possibilities of Solo is like, really, we're going to do more in this timeline?
Yeah.
Let's expand, let's explore, let's do some new things, not just more Solo because people like Han Solo.
Right.
But then you see the movie and it works.
Yeah.
It does do what it does really well. And I can't help but think again about the Castle Run sequence and how fun that is.
Yeah.
The action in this movie is really in Solo is well done all around. Yeah, it's well done, but it's kind of unique to itself. as well. Not that it isn't Star Wars, because it very much is, but it's its own type of thing. And I guess we'll just have to see. I hate that my brain just keeps wanting to know more about Lando, and whether that is this. Is it this? Is it going to be picking up the pieces? Is Alden Ehrenreich done playing Han Solo? I hope not. I hope it get more of a number of these players, and definitely more Ray Park.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was so glad he came back too as Maul. I didn't really go into that, but I was glad to see him.
Nonetheless, these are two strong movies that are both in the A territory for both of us. And we got another exciting double feature coming up next.
Yes, for sure.
The most tied together double feature.
Yeah.
Speaking of, like you mentioned, the Clone Wars original like anime tying to Revenge of the Sith. Well, welcome to Rogue One tying into A New Hope.
Right. Yeah.
That'll be the next episode. That'll be a lot of fun. In the meantime, my friend, it's been a pleasure talking about these two.
Yeah.
And we'll continue our Star Wars journey coming up with Rogue One and Star Wars, or Star Wars A New Hope, or Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. May the Force be with you, my friend.
And may the Force be with you as well.
Thanks to everyone for tuning in here on Movie Marathon Mood.